This presentation, titled Improving the Future, Lessons Learned During COVID-19 from a CB and the scheme owner perspective, comes to us from Sharonda Jeffries and Lisa Brandon. Sharonda Jeffries is an industry leader at TIA Quest Forum, an industry organization dedicated to supply chain quality for information and communication technology, ICT. She represents TIA at global standards organizations, including ISO TC 176, ISO Casco Star, and the IAF, where she's the director representing users and industry. Her leadership as the co-convener of the update of IAF mandatory documents for the use of ICT for auditing assessment purposes, MD4 2018, has allowed certification bodies, accreditation bodies, and industry organizations around the globe to mitigate the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic through continued oversight via technology, thereby protecting the integrity of supply chains for our food, aviation, and medical devices. Lisa Brandon is the Vice President of Business Development at DQS Inc., and she was previously the Vice President of Operations for 7 years. Prior to this, she was Global Operations Manager and Automotive Business Line Manager at Underwriter Laboratories in the Quality Registration Services Division. In her 33 years in the conformity assessment industry, Lisa has managed all functions related to audit and service delivery and is an ISO 9001 lead auditor. She previously held RIB QMS lead auditor and ASQ certified quality manager and certified quality auditor certifications. She represents DQS Inc. on the IAR, and serves on their communications committee and apprenticeship program central committee. And with that, take it away, Sharonda and Lisa.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. As you've heard, I'm Sharonda Jeffries. I'll be speaking on behalf of the scheme owner perspective. Now, I have to caution you, I primarily represent the telecom or the ICT industry. You'll be hearing about other industries today. I encourage you to go visit the websites for those different industries. Find out what they've got to say with regard to being a scheme owner during COVID-19. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa because Lisa, everyone's concerned about health and safety, right?
Absolutely. Everyone is concerned about health and safety. So early in the pandemic, healthcare organizations had recommendations for social distancing and how to stay safe, as well as government organizations starting lockdowns. So it was difficult for accreditation bodies and certification bodies to continue to conduct management system activities on site. So many accreditors and certification bodies issued statements to their clients in regard to how they would continue to do business. These are a few of those statements from the accreditors on the screen is DAX in Germany, UCAS in the UK, and ANAB in the US. And in their statements, they talk about performing remote assessments for their oversight activities, and that included office assessments as well as their observation of certification body activities. And we as a certification body at DQS issued a statement. We issued this statement in mid-March, and it was in regard to audits starting the last week of March. We said for the health and safety of both your employees and our auditors, we've decided it best not to conduct on-site audits until at least the end of May. And that action, for the most part, continued past May. In some cases, we did start conducting on-site audits due to the scheme requiring the audit to be on site or where the risk was too great to perform the audit remotely.
So there are lots of challenges to conducting audits and assessments during COVID-19. A lot of times folks are going to say, well, it's against the rules. Right now, logistics are playing a part because we've got lots of holidays coming up, and let's face it, time zones. We're working across many different time zones. Many of us are having a problem separating work from play. Some folks are saying their technology tools challenged, and there may be some other challenges as well. Quite frankly, many organizations, they may be shuttered, or they may have sent their employees home to work. Additionally, there's a lack of trust. Because we're not able to see each other, because we're working remotely, it may be difficult for us to have confidence and believe in what we're seeing. So as I said, I represent telecom. So we'll start with telecom as the first scheme to talk about. And then we'll briefly talk about aerospace and automotive, food safety, and we'll briefly talk about other industries, including feed, forestry, and medical devices. So let's start with telecom. As you've heard, I represent TIA Quest Forum. We've issued 2 information alerts. Now, information alerts, they don't change requirements. They provide clarification on the requirements. We've issued 2 information alerts specifically related to COVID-19. Information Alert 20-006A and Information Alert 20-003B. The first number, the 20, represents the year, obviously, and the additional numbers, they represent the order of issuance sequentially. The A and the B, they represent whether or not there's been a modification to the clarification of the information alert. There's also a survey that we sent to our TL9000 accreditation body organizations. Those are the organizations that provide oversight to our certification bodies. And those, again, the certification bodies, they issue the certificates to organizations. So we sent a survey to those organizations, the ABs and the CBs, and we were looking for recommendations for enhancements and modifications. Enhancements and modifications to our requirements for our accreditation body organizations and the certification body organizations participating in our TL9000 scheme. And we were also looking for enhancements and modifications to our TL9000 standard as well. We've just received some responses back with regard to that survey, and we'll be sharing some information soon. The Information Alert 20-006A. This information alert encouraged all of the certification bodies engaged with TL9000 to apply MD4. Now, during the introduction for myself, you heard mention of MD4. That's the IF mandatory document number 4. And it talks about the use of information and communication technology, or ICT, in audits and assessment. And so all we did at TIA Quest Forum is we encouraged certification bodies to apply information and communication technology, or ICT, to audits wherever it's appropriate. We also talked about how we were handling certificate expiration dates and those types of things. All of that was addressed in the information alert. We tried to enhance communication as well. We conducted a number of webinars in response to COVID-19. 4 specifically. We conducted a webinar on business resiliency using lessons learned from COVID-19 for business improvement. We conducted a webinar, Your Certification Body Partners for Mutually Beneficial Relationships during COVID-19 and beyond. And I'm happy to partner with the certification body representative for this presentation. We presented a webinar, Training Auditors for a Virtual World, and also Auditing in a Virtual World. And as I said, additional webinars and white papers are planned. Stay tuned for information related to the survey that we conducted for our accreditation bodies and certification bodies.
Okay, so as a certification body, I'm going to talk about the lessons learned in telecom. For the most part, the telecom organizations have transitioned easily to remote auditing, and that is primarily because a lot of their workers were already working remotely, so it wasn't difficult to have the technology in place to do so. Few telecom organizations have requested us to extend their certificates. Things have gone pretty smoothly. Some other positive impacts is reduced travel expense and environmental impact, and that's the case for any type of remote audit. And we've also enhanced our knowledge sharing. So for some corporate certifications, we're able to use an auditor from the US to audit locations in Asia that we normally wouldn't be able to do that without great expense and complicated logistics for international travel. So ultimately, it's been business as usual for telecom. So now we'll talk about the aerospace industry. The IAQG governs the AS9100 series of standards, and they've issued multiple COVID-19 policy updates The first one came out in March, and it allowed for some remote auditing. There have been some updates to it. It's allowed for additional remote auditing, and it also addresses how to handle certificates that may be expiring. I encourage you to read this if you are in the automotive industry, in the aerospace industry. And they also issued a COVID-19 FAQ log. Let's take a look at that. So you can see this FAQ log is quite long. There's 5 pages, but we want to focus on one particular item. And this question has come up. And if and when a CB determines there are activities or processes that cannot be audited remotely, for example, production, that's the one that normally comes up, and the CB is completing a recertification audit, can the CB still issue the new 3-year certificate when they didn't audit all the activities or processes? Or is this a certificate to identify IAF-ID3? And IAF-ID3 is a IAF document that addresses extraordinary events. And the aerospace industry allows for the certification body to identify certificates that have expired where the audit could not be conducted due to COVID-19 restrictions. We put this indicator on the certificate in those circumstances. So the answer is that CBs are encouraged to think outside the box and not just dismiss this clause as not being auditable, and to consider different tools that can be used, and to work with the clients on access issues and gather sufficient information in order to maintain the certificate, not to just dismiss that there are activities that can't be audited. So we're encouraged not to use that indicator if we are able to perform some sort of recertification audit. So let's talk about thinking outside the box. As a certification body, DQS, as well as some other certification bodies, have provided some help to customers about what is this remote audit thing all about. We actually, on our website, we have a couple of videos on how remote audits are conducted. And we recorded these at a time when things were really locked down and we didn't have an opportunity to go into a manufacturing organization and record it. Of course, we would need permissions and things that would get complicated if we did that. But these are simulated audits to show how it's done using some of our own resources. So I encourage you to look at it. We also provided a webinar to our customers to talk about how we do the audits, as well as how they could use this technology for performing their own internal audits, as it, with social distancing and remote workers, it's difficult to even do an internal audit. In addition, we've encouraged our auditors to review even more historical data with an increased focus on the activities in between audits. This is always a good idea, but due to remote auditing, it has become essential to do that. So lessons learned from aerospace. Unlike telecom, aerospace product is more tangible and the technologies vary due to the global supply chain diversity with varying levels of complexity, from plastics to electronics to wiring harnesses, etc. And also security concerns. So ITAR applies, and ITAR is for federal government defense organizations that provide defense products for the federal government. And it has specific restrictions that certain secure information can only be available to US persons. So we've had some customers that had concerns about remote auditing due to ITAR, but we've been able to overcome those for the most part in assuring that they understand that we're not recording anything that we wouldn't normally record in an on-site audit. But it does add some complications. Most have accepted remote auditing, or with our support, and the certifications have been able to stay on track. There has been some need for certification extensions, In some cases, this is because the plants were not operational due to reduced demand, or they had policies in place restricting visitors at this time. Another item to note in regard to aerospace is that for new certifications, certification bodies are required to conduct at least 70% of the audit on site. And typically we have done this using partial remote audits. So we may be able to audit some of the office type administrative functions remotely prior to going on site to audit activities like production and shipping, receiving, etc. So for aerospace, it's not quite business as usual, but as long as they're operating, the certifications have remained on track.
All right, so thanks, Lisa. So we've heard about telecom and we've heard about aerospace. Now let's talk about automotive. We're going to talk about automotive in terms of the IATF, the International Automotive Task Force. So the IATF, they've updated their COVID-19 response as the magnitude of the pandemic impact, COVID-19, is realized. They've extended all IATF certificate expirations by 6 months, and they've extended the timing allowed for nonconformity closure, recognizing that organizations may not be up and running. It may be more difficult to get those nonconformities that were previously issued closed. They've also extended the timing with regard to certificate decisions. They've extended audit due dates where necessary because of COVID-19. They've talked about provisions with regard to their requirement for changing auditors in the cycle, and they've allowed monitoring. Now, Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about monitoring?
Yeah, so monitoring can be done remotely, but it has restrictions, and it's only for surveillance audits. It's for extreme conditions where an on-site audit is just not possible for some reason. Now, an organization has to already be in the suspension process with the CB for 60 days. The suspension process starts after the audit is 90 days late from its due date. And then an additional 60 days passes and the remote monitoring can be done in place of the surveillance audit. It's not applicable for any other audit type. During a monitoring, nonconformities cannot be issued, but instead a decision is made in regard to the risk level of the organization. So if it's determined that the risk level is low, the certification can continue and it replaces a surveillance audit. So lessons learned for automotive. Unlike telecom and aerospace, the automotive product is even more tangible and at a higher volume. So as long as certified organizations are back in production with automotive products and have established protocols for safety of workers, we can perform an audit, and primarily the antennas for on-site auditing. But how do we address this and still keep everyone safe? It's very important for the CBs to respect any safety protocols. So let's talk about how we do that. Many of our customers request this certification body auditor to provide some sort of pre-audit health and travel history so they can determine the risk associated with the auditor coming on site. We also ask our clients to provide their safety protocol to ensure the auditor is protected and that they follow their safety protocols. And that may include PPE adherence such as, well, it always includes wearing face masks and frequent hand washing and practicing social distancing throughout the audit. Now, the social distancing can impact how the audit is conducted. Even though they're on site, it's not just a typical on-site audit. It's in some noisy environments, the auditor may have to do a physical observance of the practices and then step aside with the employee that they're interviewing in an environment where they can hear and still practice social distancing. In addition, the IATF has allowed that if an organization has remote workers, they can be audited remotely, but the auditor needs to be on site or at the support location in order to do that. So the bottom line with these protocols is that audits have been conducted safely without any known transmission incidents.
That's good, Lisa. That's good, especially as we transition and start talking about food safety. Now, for food safety, we're going to talk about the Global Food Safety Initiative. If you think about food safety, guys, hey, safety, it's key. We want to make sure that what we ingest, that we've really considered and we have confidence. So capabilities are now in place to deal with an extraordinary event like COVID-19. GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, they published a new document, Remote Auditing Activities for Accredited Food Safety Certification. It incorporates the use of ICT, or information and communication technologies, within the benchmarking requirements for GFSI. GFSI is a little bit different though, right, Lisa?
Yes, definitely. So along with the benchmarking requirements that were published, they also published an FAQ. And there were some questions coming out because the GFSI published this information in June, I believe. And it was after most of the other schemes had already allowed for remote auditing. So they've addressed some questions, one about why they were so stringent during the global pandemic when people still need food and they need to meet demand, continue certification. So this explanation, they understand that, but GFSI took a different approach in that they were already considering remote auditing or use of ICT as part of their protocol, and they continued that work to put it in their normal framework of requirements rather than something separate just for COVID-19. And if you think about that, they really accomplished it fairly quickly. And they ask, are partial remote audits in response to COVID-19? And as I said before, they're not just for COVID-19. It's certainly a help now, and it was timely to come out, but it's expected to be sustained because it's in the benchmarking requirements. Another question, other industries allow full remote auditing. Why don't you? They address the fact that there are different hazards specific to the product and processes, and you need to think about, with food. It's very important to have personal environmental hygiene within the facility, and it's hard to verify that without the use of sight, touch, and smell. So that's one of the reasons at least part of the audit needs to be conducted on site. So the GFSI benchmarking scheme is, it contains requirements that are then developed into other schemes by what's called certification program owners, CPOs. And they've adapted their allowances in their own schemes for the use of ICT in accordance with the GFSI benchmark scheme. So the GFSI benchmark is the top level, and in order to be considered a benchmark organization, they have to at least meet those requirements, and they may add additional ones. So these are some organizations, or these are the organizations that fall currently under the GFSI benchmark scheme. It is important to note that some of these CPOs have also developed non-benchmark services that allow for 100% remote auditing during COVID-19. And in that case, they've determined the risk level has been specifically for some of their certification programs that they feel don't need so much of that on-site component. And in each case, there is a notation on the certificate that the audit was conducted using remote auditing techniques. An example would be the BRCGS allowing it for their food packaging scheme. So I've talked about, and Sean and I both have mentioned these benchmarking requirements. So what do they entail? There's a requirement that if you need to extend the certification, you can do that for up to 6 months, but it requires a remote risk assessment, and there's certain elements that need to be covered in that risk assessment to ensure that the facility still has controls in place. Typically, that remote risk assessment takes a quarter to a half day to go through, and it's not considered part of the actual certification audit. It's primarily to extend the certificate. Audits must be partially on site, and it needs to cover the verification of the good manufacturing practices, the GMPs, and that's where we talked about that sight, touch, and smell component. And they also need to verify that the food safety management system covers all aspects of the operation, and that's difficult to see. You only, if you're using ICT, you see what they show you of what is within the facility. There might be some other area in the facility that you're not seeing through ICT, so that's the reason for the on-site as well. Where remote auditing and on-site activities are conducted, they need to be completed within 30 days of each other normally, but in extenuating circumstances, it can be up to 90 days between. So in the food industry, we've seen some limited shutdowns, but often we're seeing increased capacity, and that the retailers are still requiring continued certification. So the food organizations need to help us make this work, and we're working together on that.
So great, Lisa. We've now heard about telecom and aerospace, automotive, food safety. So what are other industries doing? What are other industries like with regard to what's happening during this COVID-19 pandemic? Well, feed, that goes into cattle. So FAMIQS, they've issued certification instruction, the title, Management of Extraordinary Events, COVID-19. It allows 100% remote audits for surveillances and extended on-site auditing subsequently. Forestry industry, PEFC, they've issued a guidance document, chain of custody auditing of PEFC certified companies affected by restrictions due to COVID-19. And again, they allow remote auditing. Now, medical device, if you think about it, guys, medical device, kind of scary, just like food safety. Medical device, MDSAP, they've issued a document as well. Extension and expansion of temporarily extraordinary measures related to MDSAP auditing during COVID-19 quarantine orders and travel restrictions, remote audits. That document now allows remote auditing. And ISO 13485, it allows remote auditing per allowances in accordance with IAF allowances. There's some other industry schemes. They also have special allowances. IRIS with regard to railway, ESD for electronics, and EFFCI for cosmetics. Oops. So what are the key lessons learned? Well, from me, familiarity and trust in the use of ICT techniques and tools. Pre-COVID-19 has helped some sector schemes like ICT and telecom pivot quicker than others. The use of ICT must always be balanced with identified and perceived risk as it relates to products, operating processes, and end customer confidence. Again, when you think about the risk as it relates to medical device versus telecom, may not be the same type of risk, both identified and also perceived. Increased communication, you heard about alerts and documents, guidance documents that are being issued. That's helpful. Webinars are also helpful. And the bottom line, we all need to work together to keep safety as priority number one. Hey, Lisa, what are the key lessons learned on your half?
So on my part, it's important to be aware of what's allowed for remote audits, as well as certification extensions and other rules in regard to audits being conducted per the industry guidelines and IAF allowances. In addition, consider what's right for your organization, whether it's allowing a remote audit, a partially remote, or on-site. And it needs to be appropriate based on the technologies available with the organization, or even from the CB. The CB may be able to provide their own technology to enable it and support the organization in how to use it. And of course, the associated risk associated with the products and processes needs to be considered. So I talked about partially remote. An example of what could be done partially remote, it may be that only the production operation needs to be audited on site, and maybe you have a 2-person audit team. So one person could be remote while the other one is on site, and they still conduct it as one audit, with the perhaps the person on site is located more locally and not getting on an airplane or something like that. So it reduces the social, it allows for social distancing and reduces the risk by doing what you can remotely. And ensure the path taken meets your customer expectations. Work with the CB if it doesn't, and the end customers need some kind of justification for extension. For example, there may be some customers may not be fully aware of this designation that's allowed on an airspace certificate on the IAF-ID3. So the CB might be able to help provide some information, provide a letter that explains that the reason for the expiration is due to not being able to conduct an on-site audit. And as Sharonda said, we all need to work together to keep safety as #1 at this time.
So, in thinking about whether or not we keep safety as #1 at this time, we've always got to ask the question, is the risk of not doing an audit less than doing an audit using ICT? If we don't audit, yes, we protect the health and safety of everyone. And yes, we allow the organization to continue to focus upon operations without disruption. But if we don't do an audit, there's no oversight. And if we think about, for example, food safety, as you heard Lisa indicate, they're operating at increased capacity. And so this may be a critical time for that organization and their operations. Decreased certification may result in deserters, organizations who say, you know, I used to maintain ISO 9001 certification. I used to maintain ITF 16949 certification, but I no longer do. There may be some relaxed mandates for certification in the supply chain. And ultimately, we may see increased fraud and potential liability issues due to simply extending a certification date without any oversight. But if we conduct an audit using ICT, Lisa, there's some benefits to that, right?
Absolutely. Conducting an audit using ICT, we can still protect the health and safety of everyone, as we discussed. It does allow some level of oversight, and it promotes ongoing integrity. And during the audit, we can evaluate effective business continuity and whether risk management planning has been effective, and we can see that in real time because it's applicable right now. Some possible negative impacts, or at least perceptions related to use of ICT in auditing, is the potential for ineffective audits or even fraud. But we can control that and manage it with increased competency of the auditors, and ensuring both the auditors and the client are familiar with the ICT being used, and that there's overall trust in validating that the results are accurate. In regard to auditor competency, it is required from IAF-MD4 that the auditors be competent in the use of ICT and how to conduct the audit differently. And it affects the planning of the audit all the way through, you know, the audit conduct and the reporting. We were fortunate that we had a focus early in 2020 on training our auditors on remote auditing. So before the pandemic, that was our intent for 2020, to move to more remote auditing. And it was very timely because we trained our auditors and they were able to use it right away. And it's also important for the auditor to still direct the audit and not just audit what the customer puts on the screen, but to make sure they're telling the customer what they need to see if they're not seeing it, to continue to assure that they see it.
So recognizing that COVID-19 is still with us right now, we'd like to share some resources with you. So ISO's Committee on Conformity Assessment, also known as CASCO, they've conducted a survey themselves. And the main areas covered by the ISO CASCO survey, along with STAR, and STAR is the Strategic Alliance and Regulatory Group. STAR is composed of scheme owners, representatives from aerospace, telecom, automotive, and also food safety. B participates along with forestry and railway as well. The main areas covered by the ISO CASCO STAR survey were maintaining business continuity and carrying out on-site remote activities, carrying out audits of organizations that are operating remotely. One of the key things is we've compiled a list of useful resources, and this information is literally hot off the presses. The URL that you'll see at the top right-hand side of the screen, it was just made public last week, hot off the presses. With that said, we'd like to thank you for participating in our presentation today. Again, my name is Sharonda Jeffries. My contact information is shown. You've also heard from Lisa Brandon. Lisa's contact information is shown. We'd like to thank you again, and don't forget to purchase your CPD certificate. Again, thanks for attending the Future of Auditing Expo.
And thank you, Sharonda Jeffries and Lisa Brandon, for your perspectives on the lessons that auditors can learn about COVID-19 from a scheme owner and a CB. And that concludes this presentation.